But again, it goes back to all those things. Recognize your stage. Where are you? Are you locked in the ancient library? Are you so offended by the new information that's challenging your new world or your existing world, calling you to a new world without throwing away Jesus and the Bible and church and all those things? And then are you willing to do new things and try new things and knowing that God's with you and that, guess what? You can't screw up his plan.
Welcome to Amy Liz Harrison's podcast, Eternally Amy, a mum of eight's journey from jail to joy. A Gen Xer who overcame her struggle with alcohol to become a best-selling author and mental health advocate. She shares stories of hope and offers ideas for others struggling with mental health challenges, spirituality, ADHD, or maybe just family, travel, and logistics. One thing is for sure, you'll leave with something to chew on. And now, here's your host, Amy Liz Harrison, with your mystery meat sandwich.
Okay, greetings, compadres. I'm super excited today. I'm always excited, but this is like excited plus, I would say, because I have a very special episode in mind for you today. Special, unique. I'm not sure what the word is anymore. I just don't want to use the wrong word because I feel like I'm always doing that. So who I have on today is Matt Woll. He is a friend of mine. I'll unpack that in a little bit, but he's also my audio engineer, which is super exciting. But Matt has spent over 2 decades in church leadership. Most recently, this is where I met him, was as an executive pastor. And he's been doing this in faith communities in the Pacific Northwest. And I think prior to that, you were in San Jose, my hometown.
Yeah, I had a year. I had to find myself for a couple of years after one church experience. And I went to Portland for a year and then the Bay Area for a year. But I'm a Northwest kid, so always had to get back here.
Love it. So here's the deal. So one of the pillars of my podcast has been the deconstruction and reconstruction of faith. And so Matt and I were just kind of recently talking about this concept, and through the recording of my audiobooks, just through general friendship, right? I would say that one of the greatest joys of going to the church where we met was that it was a safe place to just talk about things and explore some different things. So if you were new, it was a safe space. And if you were, quote, old, unquote, in your faith, it was a safe place. So that was nice. And today we're going to be talking about that concept, about, something that's very individual for each of us, which is our faith beliefs. And if you grew up evangelical like we did in the 80s and 90s, sometimes that has been left with some bittersweetness to it. Mm-hmm. And so I want to be clear, as I set this up, that the intention isn't like a church bashing session. The intention here is just to share experiences. And so I basically just want to say thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks,
my
Matt.
pleasure.
I'm pumped. And I just want to turn the floor over to you. Sure. And if you want to just tell about your...
Absolutely. Yeah. For me, I became a Christian, decided to follow Jesus when I was a senior in high school at Malibu camp. I was a Young Life kid. Wow. And I had some musical talent. I'm also a musician. And a friend of mine saw me play guitar at a talent show at my high school and said, "Hey, wait a minute. There's a guy that could play from the songbook on Wednesday nights." So,
hold on, though. What were you playing? Do you remember?
What songs?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
No.
He's Alive.
Oh, yeah.
He's alive.
Know it well.
Sorry. PTSD. Yep. Call your counselor. BetterHelp.com is a great help. So yeah, Young Life was my formative experience. I grew up in a Baptist church, very conservative, very black and white thinking. And when I heard about Jesus at Young Life, it's like I heard the heart of what it meant to follow Jesus in my own language. I said, "Oh, that's what it is? That's what I want." And so that's when I started. And then I went to school and kept playing music and kept volunteering at, church different, not church stuff, but like there was a college ministry called the Inn that in Bellingham. I went to Western up in Bellingham. And that's where my first church job was. I was a youth music associate as my first job out of college, making $800 a month, living with a roommate above a car wash on Sunset Drive up there. It was
That's amazing.
quite glamorous, I must say. But that's how I got into it. And it was, I've always been attracted to building faith communities just because, that experience of hearing what it meant to follow Jesus and what that meant in my own language. So I was very passionate about contextualizing this message that seemed so simple and pure to me. It's like, in college, you're asking yourself the question, why are we here? And what does this all mean? And what's my purpose? And, university being, meaning like a worldview. You're there to form your worldview. And so you look at all the worldviews and you say, what is this? What is that? And what does that mean? And so in college, it was really fun to like look at all of the world's religions and, that's what I was kind of into, is studying that stuff and reading my conservative Christian faith upbringing, stuff, and then being exposed to new worldviews and ways of thinking. And, and it was fun. To me, it was like, oh, this is great. I can just see what's out there. And then I get to make my decision. Like you said, it's this personal choice and pursuit. So to me, like following Jesus made the most sense because of all the world religions, he was the only God, quote unquote, that came for me. And I didn't have to live up to some kind of perfection standard. And almost, I mean, all the other religions and even New Age philosophy, it was like you had to be good enough to approach your purpose or your creator or your God or whatever it was. And so that to me, it's still today is the heart of why I still pursue the teachings of Jesus and living a life informed by the way that he lived his life. And that's where so just the preamble and kind of set the stage of where my thought process is on individual faith. That one is the primary belief that I ascribe and subscribe to is Jesus, because I can't find anything else like it that makes even common sense. To me, it's like, I know myself and I'm not perfect, and there's no way that I can get good enough to approach something infinite or perfect. And so if we're asking ourselves that question of why are we here, as many people are every day, whether it's conscious or subconscious, we're all dealing with that.
Yeah.
Or how did we get here even, or, all those things. So that's where I'm coming from in my personal life on this question. And then vocationally being involved in organizations, institutions that have self-preservation introduced into that, rather than having it, this personal pursuit of faith and of a life in Christ, or the Christ, or what that means is deeply personal. And so, but again, you look at the way Jesus lived, and it's meant to be lived not in isolation and not alone. And so, yeah, there's a real conflict there, especially today, as you look at the history of the church. We don't have to go through a church history course right now, but we find ourselves in a very interesting time, and sort of corporate faith communities are all struggling to figure out, what do we do now, and why isn't it like it was before? And what I've observed in many of the faith communities that I've been a part of is they kind of all go through this evolution of, it was founded in this era or this time under this sort of compass setting, a denomination, whatever the leadership of that denomination or that independent church. I've mostly been drawn to independent faith communities just because it kind of, gets you away from, the guilt of we've got to maintain the institution that our forefathers,
Yes.
Like I didn't choose to do that. You guys did. So it's okay for things to go away too. So, but where I find myself today is like, the church we were at was like, oh my gosh, this is we kind of all have arrived there. Of like, this is a personal pursuit of faith, and everybody's welcome, whether you've, been a church kid or not, or whatever your background is. And that to me felt like the way Jesus treated people.
Yeah.
And so we didn't have a lot of unwritten rules or these secret doors in the culture. And we tried to be as transparent as possible. And we had this really great groove going, like I was there 7 years before the COVID pandemic and the outcomes of of 2020 to now wreaked havoc on, organizing people.
Right.
And so that came to an end. And, I'm still kind of processing and mourning the loss of that community, and have chosen personally not to give up on gathering with other people of faith. But even in helping to build that last expression, we learned a ton because we were all on this pursuit of Jesus, not of a paradigm or not of a, definition or, hey, okay, this church has the 6 position papers that I agree with, so I'm going to go there.
Yeah.
And so what I loved most about, and what I think I still am looking for and want to be a part of building, is faith communities that are, focused on the primary belief of Jesus, Jesus being the one guy who won't go away, who we don't have an answer for, who beat death as a human being, who came for us, that we didn't have to live up to the standard for. And going from there being, okay, everything else, and this is how I see him living, everything else other than he is God, he is God's son, he is deity, he is the Christ, the only human Christ we've ever seen. Everything else is like, that's how you work out your path.
Mm-hmm.
You have conversations at tables with people that you're choosing to be faith family members with, and you live it out. Hey, we agree on the main thing. We're all going to laugh about all this stuff in whatever comes next, but to like break relationship with folks over politics or labels or definitions or any of that stuff it's been so disheartening for folks. And I know I'm not alone in that, because you look at, there's thousands of people that I used to be in faith community with that aren't, that have just walked away, and so this topic of deconstruction is the phrase that gets thrown around. And so when I talk about deconstruction, just so you know, I'm like, I'm talking about, I'm a Jesus follower. And yet I think deconstruction is a process, and it's not it's not an escape pod from, I'm looking at your Star Wars posters right now, but it's not an escape pod from the Death Star. It's a process. So, Tim Keller I'll talk about my favorite authors and, some other things that I've learned, but the process of deconstruction has to be followed by reconstruction. So Amy, think about your house that we're sitting in right now. Like, hey, I'm deconstructing my whatever,
right.
I'm going to rip my house down. Okay, well, then what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Well, I deconstructed it.
Right.
And so I'm out. I'm out of this. I didn't like this house. I'm done.
Yep.
I deconstructed.
Yep.
And that's what the mistake I see a lot of my friends making is it's deconstruction. I'm burned. I got hurt by the church. I got, whatever. I don't get it anymore. It doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
And that's just what makes me sad. It's like, because we all used to do that process over and over again, in university or when we were younger.
Yeah.
We'd like, oh, I'm into this. I'm not into that anymore. Why? Oh, because I learned this, and I
threw that out.
Yeah, exactly. So deconstruction, it requires new information that you then use to reconstruct whatever it is that you're talking about. So the mistake I see friends and people making is like deconstruction because it's painful right now without reconstructing anything.
Yeah.
And without pursuing, something that is going to help you reconstruct that. And I just have this quote from Tim Keller, who is one of the guys I like to read. Also, a lot of the books that have helped me a great deal in this. The first one that I read, because I think this started for me in like 2012, and it's been the last 10 years or so of this process in the church at large or in faith at large, but for me it was this book called The Great Spiritual Migration by Brian Mclaren, who's been a really great thought leader on the modern church and modern faith gatherings, and it's a fantastic book. I recommend that one. And he tries to help us all do this deconstruction, but yet include the reconstruction. And then What is the Bible by Rob Bell is
So
a
good.
fantastic context setter for the Bible, which I want to talk about if we have time. So that's a great one. I think, again, Tim Keller's work on the historicity and the historical progress of Western faith communities. And he's just a great theologian, historian. His stuff's great. But when it comes to this topic of deconstruction, he says this. He says, what do these occasions for faith reconstruction have in common? In each case, in one way or another, the believer's faith was not mature and full enough to handle a change in the world they were facing. So what did we all just go through?
Yeah.
A change in the world that we're
Big
facing.
change.
Like
Yep.
the biggest one that I can ever remember. And then he goes on to say, sufferers often find that their faith was adapted to the world they want, and so it could not survive an encounter with the real world as it is. The disillusioned found their faith rested in an imagined world that was divided between the very good, who seldom sinned in serious ways, and the very bad, who did so regularly, which allows us to just sit on our horse and judge everybody.
Yep.
You know, and,
Totally.
which is not how Jesus lived. Again, such faith cannot survive an encounter with the real world. Those who find themselves shaken by the skeptical questions of non-supportive cultures will also be led to rethink their faith and make changes. So it's this change in worlds that this is not the first time this has happened, but it's the first time I've seen everybody just kind of get into this deconstruction umbrella and just stop and sit in the rubble.
Yes.
That's been my personal goal not to do, because I'm facing the same frustrations in history. And, I have friends ask me after some of the experiences that I've had in the 6 different churches that I've worked for vocationally, they're like, why, how are you still here? Like doing this stuff,
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it's really is. It goes back to, well, I look at Jesus again and I say, look, again, from deconstruction to reconstruction, the interim is new information. And if we close ourselves off to new information, then we can't reconstruct and we'll sit in the rubble. Who pays the price? Us.
Yep.
Nobody thinks about me more than I do. So nobody's going to be like, oh, what's wrong? We got to go save that guy. No, I was like, oh, look at that guy sitting in the pile of rubble. He should build a house again that he can live in.
Yeah.
And, talking to a friend of mine about it and the urge and the perceived simplicity of just cutting it off. It's sort of like this tree grew and you're out on a branch. We talked about this last time.
I loved it.
But
Yeah.
you're on this branch that you grew up in this tree and you're standing out on this branch and gosh, you know what? Looks like we've got some disease in the tree. The leaves got weird markings on them and, we're seeing the bark fall off where it shouldn't. But I'm standing on this branch that's put me here in this place that I, love. I'm a tree person, so I love it. But because the tree is sick and in need of reformation, do I then take my saw and cut off that branch? What's going to happen to me if I do that? I'm just not willing to cut off the branch that got me to where I am in my life now, and throw that all away. And so, and it's because of a lot of things. A lot of things that we've seen the church do have eroded the trust of the world. And again, this is not the first time it's happened. But so what do? Well, we take this new information and we ask our higher power, our creator, our God, look at Jesus, how he lived, say, now then how should we live? That was one of Jesus' jams, was you've heard it said, talking about the old ways of living, the old ways of operating, the old ways of organizing. You've heard it said to do this, but I say this. And it was the exact opposite of the current culture, the current mode of operation, the current way you did stuff, and so that's the most revolutionary thread in the life of Jesus that I see, is his ability to, quote unquote, turn the tables over on things that we had new information about. So you can insert any hot topic on this and say, okay, if I was Jesus looking at this, what would he say? If he would say, you have heard it said, but I say, would change a lot.
Yeah.
And that's, then we get into talking about the Bible and what is it and what is it meant to be. And, a lot of folks want to hunker down in this library that has a closed and locked door on it. And there are others who are saying, man, I think Jesus wants us to open this door and not throw him away in this consideration of how do we reconstruct our faith for the world we live in now with the new information we have. Again,
Yeah.
and that's what I see most people doing when I say cut the branch off.
Yes.
I mean, like, oh, well, we need to throw all of it away
Right.
and just start over.
Yeah.
And what is out there? Oh my gosh, now we know mushrooms have medicinal, or whatever it is,
Yeah.
it's like, and that's not even bad. I'm just saying, like, you
Right,
can't just,
right.
I just don't think you can throw away the person of Jesus.
Yeah.
And that means we should still gather and still study the depth of his teachings and his word and the entirety of the message of the Bible. I just don't think we should keep ourselves locked into those words. Again, that new information concept, of imagine a company that has a stone tablets of here's how we do business.
Right.
And Amy, you need to fax your application in every Friday using the fax machine,
Yep.
And you're like, well, the tablets say we have to fax it in. What do you mean I can just airdrop you the PDF? No, I have to fax it. No, it says to fax it. It's like those kinds of things.
Yeah.
That's what drives me crazy. Of like these
the dogma.
Yeah. And so that's where we are today, I think, and personally where I am is trying to find places that are not going to throw away the book. They're not going to burn down the library, but they're going to look deeper at it and to take in new information and say, now how should we live?
Mm-hmm.
You look at Jesus and saying, the end of the Bible is, behold, I'm making all things new.
Mm-hmm.
All things new. That sounds like an ongoing process. That doesn't sound like this is it, stay in here and that's it. So that's my extremely long, and there's a million illustrations and allegories and stuff in there, but that's kind of been my thought process over the last really 7 years, of getting us to, because I'm still passionate about gathering people that want to learn from and follow Jesus and being a part of that. But again, it goes back to all those things.
Yeah.
Recognize your stage. Where are you? Are you locked in the ancient library? Are you so offended by the new information that's challenging your new world or your existing world, calling you to a new world without throwing away Jesus and the Bible and church and all those things? And then are you willing to do new things and try new things and knowing that God's with you and that, guess what? You can't screw up his plan. Like we put all this like pressure. Oh, what if we screw up the way that the church is run? I'm like, bro, you don't have that much power.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
God, the creator, our higher power, our God's going to do what he wants to do. We can't screw it up.
Well, thank you for sharing all that. And I have to say, the immediate thing that sticks out in my mind after hearing you just say locked in the ancient library, I think about, because my church was super conservative and
yeah, mine too, growing up.
I mean, it was like wedded to the past, and I think that for me growing up, there was kind of this like safety in the assurance of like, this is how we do things.
Yeah.
And this is how we run this place. This is how we operate. This is what we say.
Yeah. There's comfort and control. And that's the whole thing. Yeah. It's the illusion of control.
Right. And then the whole idea of like, you'll hear people talk about the progressive churches. Like this is this terrible thing. We got to get rid of these progressive churches before they poison us.
You know what the definition of progressive is? You've heard it said, but I say. Who said that? That is literal progression. It's progression in the way that you pursue your relationship with your creator. And so I mean, if you don't like progressive faith, then you're not reading Jesus' words.
Well, yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
And, I think that I would hope like that we would be progressive in that if I'm stuck in the same stagnant place And I always think of, I used to teach Pilgrim's Progress.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's
And,
great.
being stuck in that mire and just that quicksand feeling of like, I can't get out of this. I think that's unpleasant. I don't think that that's a great way to live out my faith. I think, it's just to have something living, breathing, active, dynamic is probably more of what I'm looking for, at least now.
Yeah. Well, that's another comment is my friends who have deconstructed or left the church or, written it off. But my church is whatever. I've replaced that with whatever. I don't see how are you being the church? And like, have you deconstructed to just selfishness? And again, I'm not saying you shouldn't go heal. I just said I'm still healing from previous experiences, and I'm not saying you shouldn't take time away from whatever it means for you to participate. But yeah, have a reentry plan, or at least if you're not going to align with a group expression or a faith community, then at least ask yourself, how am I living out these teachings? Am I still doing what Jesus did, being generous and being faithful and serving the poor and caring for orphans and widows and and worshiping by showing worth in the way that you're designed to? The thoughts of it's broken, it's over. That just seems insane to me. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah. Well, and I think too, it's very easy to, at least for me, to slip into this. And I don't know if this is just because I've been in the church for so long, but like I'll slip into sometimes this like, oh, well, this isn't working. And, I got to get rid of this. Well, define working. What does that mean? Like, I mean, I've been married for almost 25 years. We've had ups, we've had downs. Anything in life that is with you for the duration of time is going to go through, changes and groanings and, rumblings and childbirths. And,
I love the human body. Every cell in our body changes and regenerates and becomes something brand new every 7 years.
Yeah.
So that's like, hey, it's written on our beings that we will change and make all things will be made new, and so. Yeah.
Quick sidebar, when I turned 7 years sober, I had a friend give me a card and it said on it, "You have all new cells."
Oh.
And I loved it.
Yeah.
It was just such a neat picture of like, that's amazing.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's my point.
Love it.
That's what progression is. I don't see it as, it's so politicized and we probably can't even use that word anymore. Because it's been, we're all black and white thinkers again in our current political, state. But I just think it's, you can't, I've said evolution, I'm going to get canceled by somebody or progression. I'm canceled by somebody. I just loved at churches, like we would just even talk about something current through the lens of faith or Jesus. And people would project their own experience or their own opinion onto whatever we were saying. And we're literally going straight up the middle, like on any, again, secondary belief.
Yeah.
That again, I think you should be able to talk about from anywhere. But they would just project their own opinion and like, okay, I'm out.
100%.
You guys talked about whatever hot topic. I'm out. Sounds, you're even talking about it. I'm out. I'm like, okay.
For real. For real. Like, have you ever been to a church when you were maybe in your younger days where they actually had a pamphlet on who Christians should vote for?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, that stuff was, it sounds crazy now, but that stuff was commonplace.
It still happens, and Jesus was never political. He was, give to Caesar what's Caesar's, follow me. Oh, that's the country you live in. Those are the laws. Yeah. Just do them.
Mm-hmm.
Organize yourselves, great. But I'm about something much bigger than that. So.
And I think that's key right there for me. Like for where I'm at is that I realized how small of a box I had put God in. And, God has to look like this, that, and the other thing. And then a church has to be, a building and walls. And it was not so much about people to me. It was very much, hey, where's the baptistry? Like that was a hard hurdle I know this sounds crazy. It's a hard hurdle for me to get over moving to Washington State from California because we had just different churches in California, and moving here was like churches were meeting in high schools and movie theaters and all kinds of nightclubs.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm like, what is going on?
Yep.
Yeah. And
wait a minute. That's way too progressive.
Right.
You didn't have a baptistry. How dare you?
Legit. I was like concerned. I'm not kidding.
No, I'm just saying I identify with that for sure. Yeah.
So funny. Wait, okay, we're having communion. Where are the elders and why are they not wearing suits? Like,
I know. Oh man. Yeah, there's so many of those like cultural things and it's okay to have preferences. It's not wrong. Sure. Like singing hymns are great. Wearing robes is fine. You just can't make any of these like temporary things, so precious that they keep you out of relationship with Jesus and with the people that also want to follow him.
So you touched on the Bible. Yeah. So I have a question.
Yeah, go.
And you mentioned the word, the message of the Bible, which I loved because I was taught to take the Bible, quote, literally, unquote, which was difficult when you have different people interpreting it differently.
Yeah. I think that's why that book, What is the Bible, is so good. Yeah. There's a lot in this question, but
I know.
I think the way that I see it now is because I grew up in the same way, taking the Bible literally. I mean, you look at it, that's not even a question the Bible is asking itself.
Right.
It's poetry. It's literature. It's historical documentation.
Yep.
It's genealogies. It's so again, it's a question that's not even being asked.
Right.
Or it's just a trick question. Is the Bible true? Can you take the Bible literally? Sometimes. Yeah. Like
it depends.
Yeah. I mean, like it's such a more beautiful piece of work and expression of who God is than to put it into that realm. One of my favorite parts of the way that book so eloquently describes the way that we can look at the Bible and its writing. Because again, even people say the word scripture. Well, what is scripture? Is this letter that Paul wrote to the Ephesians, is that scripture? Because he's referencing scripture from the Old Testament law. So how did he know that what he was saying was scripture? Like, it's just like, come on, we just want all these little terms that don't really mean what they mean. But the way that book describes the way you look at the Bible and this incredible library that is 100% God's love letter to us, his expression of how we're to live, and again, how we are to grow and how we are to take new information and continually die and resurrect the way that we express it in our world. But Rob Bell talked about it as you can read a verse, you can read a passage, and the thing that opened my eyes to a new way of looking at it is to say, it was written so that there's something going on. You read the words literally, read what's happening, but there's always something going on above and below that line. Yeah. Does that make sense? So
absolutely.
You can see the Bible when you really study it. It becomes like a 3D, if we're 80s, you like 80s, 3D glasses. Like totally. It's like you put on 3D glasses when you see what's going on, what the history and the message before and the genealogy and all the stories that overlap.
The context.
Go into that actually written, captured word. And then the third level going above is like, okay, what is this pointing us to? And so that's when you talk about the through line, or I talk about the arc of Jesus and the Bible. And if you lock yourself in the ancient library, you close that door, you cut off that thread.
Right.
And then you have to just answer for yourself. Like, is God still speaking to us, or is he done? Because if he's done speaking, then we just live the way that an ancient agrarian Middle Eastern society should live. It's like it just doesn't make sense to me. Like the audience that was written for was middle-aged. Sorry, that's self-revealing. But a Middle Eastern agrarian culture is why we're talking about shepherds and farming and, all this, nomadic tribes. And so, I mean, to me, it just is clear you've got to take the principles, and that's what, we tried to do as church leaders is to take these incredibly powerful, historic 3D Bible texts, and then to say, here's how should now we live, knowing. And the way Jesus lived was to progress, to say, you've heard it said, but I say. And again, people get scared by these terms. They're like, well, oh my gosh, you're going to throw the Bible away, and it's not going to be. And some people do that. Well, then they're out. They're just like, you know what? It's too much work to go interpret the scrolls, and say, how do I live in Bellevue with that information,
Right.
And, I always loved that part of it. Does that make sense? So when I talk about the Bible,
Yep.
when you look at it as not a linear black and white words on the page, but a 3D image.
I love
and it's like I can't remember who said it. This might have been Tim Keller, but there's the idea that the Bible is also like a diamond. So, you look at a diamond and the way the light shines through it changes from every angle that you look at it. And, it's a perfect clarity.
Yep.
Piece
but
of work.
if you're parked in the corner with your pipe and your smoking jacket and your slippers sitting around, you're only going to ever get one angle.
If you don't go outside, you're not going to get natural light that it was meant to be in.
That's right. Yeah. No, it's so true. And I think that the same goes for the whole black and white thinking. I know that it kind of the whole concept of saying, I don't know was not.
Oh,
that
you couldn't.
Was not a thing.
No, certainty was the addiction growing up. It's like, you're certain. And that's where we don't find our peace and strength in the journey. We find our peace and strength in the certainty that we've got the truth and we know exactly what this is. And,
Yeah. We even did like role playing. Like we would have workshops on like, leading others to Christ and what to do if somebody was questioning things. We would have to be sort of ready with answers. And
And that was the whole Josh McDowell era of evangelicalism.
Oh, yeah.
Being, we have the proof that this works. That sounds like love and acceptance and, breaking cultural barriers and talking to, inappropriate people at the well. One of my favorite passages is, Jesus breaking all the rules.
Yeah.
The cultural rules, talking to the woman at the well. And like high noon, hottest part of the day. So she, as a divorced woman, could go get water, at that point. And you're not supposed to talk to her because she's unclean. And Jesus like walks right up.
Yeah. No, I love it. And I love the whole concept of the lack of humility, but it's sort of veiled as like, this is the whole idea of being sure of what we know. That's not arrogant or anything by any stretch that we have the end all be all answer for everybody on the planet.
Right.
In the way that our church actually presented it too, so it's kind of this weird, because I think, if it's an individual, there's a phrase in the church where I grew up that says personal relationship with Christ. So then if it's personal, I think that means that it's probably as individual as we are. And so even when you were talking about the Bible, in the geology, the history, its poems, its letters. I mean, I've never heard that before. And that's really true when it's presented in that way. It's like, oh, so here is this book and it's got all of these different, just as you all, my children are all different. Yep. And I think that's so beautiful that it can be so many different things to so many people.
Yeah, it is. And it's, again, the power is not in us. The power of it is in the higher power, our God, our Jesus. Like, it's not our power. And that's where we confuse things. That's where so many things go wrong. Yeah. Is that, oh my gosh, I got a mega church. Look at all this quote unquote power I have. And
butts in seats.
But yeah, it's also the power to manipulate, the power to embezzle, the power to every other scandal you can talk about. And it's sad, a lot, especially in Seattle area, we've seen a lot of things that have gone down that have been really challenging to continuing to pursue it. But yeah, that's Bible's beautiful, and it will never go away, and it shouldn't.
Yeah. What do you think as we like prepare to wrap this up, which is kind of funny because I feel like these are the chapter highlights, and we could talk about
this would be like an intro to a series.
Exactly.
But yeah.
But I'm wondering, what do you see for the future of the church as it? I mean, I know COVID was really difficult for a lot of churches, and a lot of churches started doing online things, and I mean, are people going to go back to buildings? I know people are already there, but what do you think?
I don't know. I still think there's a real simplicity to it, that it doesn't have to be so complicated. What we've lost is the ability to dialogue and disagree and to grow together. And even if somebody, like the organization I work for now, we do faith gatherings and look at the Bible in different cultures, and there are people that don't even believe in Jesus that lead these explorations of the Bible, because it's beautiful and it's so powerful. And so I think a lot of us, we always like to look at the church in Acts, because it was kind of when the modern gatherings are all come from that time. And so they met every day in the temple courts and from house to house. That Acts 5:42, and that's the basic building blocks of a faith community. They met in temple courts. Could be the building that you own, could be the high school, could be the club, could be whatever. But they met, and they knew that there was a reason that drew them together, and it was pursuit of what's next and who Jesus is. And so I still think it's that simple. It's temple courts and house to house. And if you give that up, you can still pursue it personally, but I think we're designed to thrive in community. And God's desire, Jesus' instructions in life were meant to point to the way to universal flourishing. That's the word shalom is what is talked about. Universal flourishing doesn't sound like it leaves anyone out.
Right.
So how then do we create environments intentionally that allow people to gather, to pursue truth and faith without being excluded, without being, okay, well, here's what we believe and who you're voting for,
the pamphlet.
So that's just kind of backwards. It hurts everything. But the future of the church being, I don't know. I know that, like I said, in 2012 is when I think this great migration and this great change started. We didn't know we were going to call it deconstruction as a buzzword.
Oh yeah,
but
totally. Trending.
I think that's kind of when it started, when the height of the evangelical movement and the proving people to faith,
right,
kind of ended. Really, at least in my experience. And then now we get to figure it out. Like I see so many creative expressions of what it means to follow Jesus. And I also see people clinging to the old models and the old ways of doing it. And that's a challenge, because if you're going to innovate, there's a great book by Clayton Christensen called The Innovator's Dilemma. And it's a business book, but it speaks to the way that we continue and move forward into building faith communities. And it's the innovator's dilemma is simply, if there's somebody that's going to introduce a new way of doing things, a new technology, but the fax machine works fine. Why would you have a tablet?
Right.
Amy?
Right.
And so the first tablet makers are like, they're like, oh my gosh, I think this is the future, but we can't get funding to mass produce these things. And so we're going to keep making fax machines, but we're going to try to scrape and save and, bring new partners on so we can innovate somehow. That's kind of where I see the church being, is like, we've got this dilemma of how do we move forward? And maybe it's not funded by denominations and not funded by whomever, because it's really comes down to like how, or it's that bivocational question and think, people are trying to do both things, or they're just saying we're all going to do our lives and be professionals and we're going to gather in the temple courts and from house to house without an umbrella corporation,
right?
But again, there's power in gathering lots of people. You can do a ton of stuff
Mm-hmm.
and have a huge impact in serving the poor, the marginalized, the broken, when you do gather and pool resources like they did in Acts,
Mhm.
So that's where I think the challenge is now. It's to like, okay, look, this other model we see is coming to an end,
Mm-hmm.
and you're just kind of pretending not to see it if you don't recognize that. And then there's
Mhm.
these other things that aren't proven. And what even is it? So how do I live into that? And that's where where the personal faith comes in. It's like, Jesus, how have you made me? That's why your Enneagram stuff is awesome.
Mm.
Like self-awareness, healing from the past, doing the personal work of quote unquote salvation
Mm-hmm.
and quote unquote discipleship. That's what it is. It's
Mhm.
that, what's God doing now? How should I live? And what do I bring to it?
I love that so much because it just reminds me of, it's like the perfect place to end, actually, because it reminds me of when I sponsor girls in 12-step program.
Mhm.
Sometimes they've been around for a year or two trying to get sober.
Mhm.
And so they know some of the book. They know some of the
Right,
big
the
book.
big
They
book.
know some of
Yep.
the 12 and 12.
Yep.
And so when we're reading and dissecting those passages, I'll just say, what did you hear today?
Mm.
Like, I don't
That's a
want to
great
hear
question.
what you think that it, means, or, you read an extra excerpt from whatever. Just what did you hear today? Because it will sound differently than it does tomorrow, depending on, the lens of whatever you're going through.
Your life. And
Yeah.
if you believe that God's still speaking,
Right.
He's giving
right.
you new information.
Yeah.
If you're paying attention. Yep.
And I love that because, again, it shows like the health of like, P.S. This is a current thing. Like,
Mhm, mhm.
this has a heartbeat, hopefully, and this has a way of influencing us that's, active, and it's not
Yeah.
parked in the corner.
Right.
And I just love that. I think it's so beautiful. And, like I say a lot on this podcast, that the opposite of addiction is connection.
Mm.
But I believe that connection piece is just so true for the human experience and for the experience of, every soul. It's like you just a place to belong, whether that's
Yeah,
with another
exactly.
understanding person, whether it's with, just somebody who accepts you for your growth journey and path. And, I look forward to how I can be a part of rolling that ball.
Mm.
In
I think that's what we
positive
loved
direction.
at our last church. Is
Yes,
that we had
yes.
created. I think if you, the short answer to the future of the church is, belonging.
Yeah,
That is the theme.
yeah,
That's
yeah. It's
it.
a theme, and
That's enough.
And it's enough. It's enough because, we don't have to get the McDonald's slides down to the youth group area, and we're going to have confetti cannons
Hey, no offense, Texas.
and
You're
give
fine.
away iPads,
The slides
which
are amazing.
is great,
But
right? For sure. But I love also ending on that note because I love Richard Rohr's book, Everything Belongs. And I
Mhm.
think that is one of the just best books out there to help break some of those black and white thinking tendencies. At
Mhm.
least for me, it was
yeah,
great. It was very
I love his stuff.
like a breakthrough for me. So
Yeah, I left him out. I shouldn't have, but yeah.
That's all right.
He's fantastic.
shout out, Richard Rohr.
That's
We
right.
love you. Yeah. Well, Matt, thank you so much.
Yeah,
I mean,
my pleasure.
Yeah, that was so meaty, like meaty. Look, I've got all these notes here. I just love writing when people are talking about subjects that they know so much about and they're passionate about. And so thank you so much for coming and sharing your story.
Absolutely. Happy to slice up some mystery meat.
Love it. Well, on that note, there is a bailout bag that I have for you today, and it's the same one I have every time, but it's great. So it goes like this: be kind, rewind. I thank you for the honor of your time, and take what you like, leave the rest behind.
Thank you so much for listening to Eternally Amy. Amy Liz Harrison is a best-selling author, speaker, 12-step coach, meditation teacher, and recovery advocate. To find out more, please visit amylizharrison.com. Keep up with Amy on all platforms by following @AmyLizHarrison. Please subscribe and review this podcast. It means so much to us if you do.